for joining us. This is Circularity Connections, and I'm Allyson Mitchell, Vice President of Sustainability at Mobile reCell. Circularity Connections highlights conversations with individuals and companies taking steps to ensure a sustainable future. We highlight the collaboration, technology, and reshaped processes that make future sustainability and circular economy possible. For our first conversation today, I'm excited to connect with Pamela McLaren of Star Signal Partners. Pamela, welcome.
Thank you, Allyson. I always enjoy our conversations.
Well, thanks for joining me today. We're going to have a discussion on sustainability, ESG, the changes that we've seen in this field in recent years, the current state of ESG, and then just generally what folks in sustainability and IT need to know about this evolving space. And before we dive into this topic, I want to introduce Pamela to our audience. Pamela is President and CEO of Star Signal Partners, a sustainability consulting company based in Dallas. Pamela leads Star Signal Partners' ESG advisory practice that helps clients strategize, plan, develop, and implement resilient and customized programs to meet the needs of the future today by continually improving their internal capacity to thrive, manage change, reduce risk, capitalize on opportunity, attract and retain talent, and navigate the present demands of their stakeholders. That's quite a bit, and that's really important stuff that you're doing there. Her experience helping clients to navigate the complex and ever-changing ESG landscape and to establish meaningful metrics and targets towards becoming a sustainable organization is indispensable. She is a qualified ISO 14001 lead auditor, an exemplar global certified EMS auditor, an ISI Envision sustainability professional, and a GBCI certified lead green associate. She's added lots of acronyms to her name, as you can see. She is one of the first sustainability professionals to earn SASB's FSA credential and have passed the GRI certified professional exam. That's a pretty cool distinction to have. She's also served as an adjunct faculty member for Indiana University's O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, Purdue University on the Indianapolis campus, teaching urban sustainability and environmental justice. So if you can't tell by now, Pamela has done lots of things and been in lots of spaces and really beefed up her resume in terms of different training. So I'm excited to talk to her today. Her website is starsignalpartners.com, and you can also find her on LinkedIn. And I highly recommend connecting with her because she is an incredible connector and has an amazing network. And Pamela and I have known each other for many years. She's based in Dallas, Texas now, but for many years worked in Indianapolis. And we met when she and I worked together at the city of Indianapolis way back in 2009, 2010, something like that, when I was a project manager at the city of Indianapolis, and she was a consultant, and we were working together on green stormwater infrastructure projects within the Department of Public Works there. So that's when I originally connected with Pamela. I've stayed in touch with her ever since. She has been a guest lecturer in a sustainability graduate course that I taught at IUPUI. And she's always been a go-to resource for me, especially when I'm looking at big picture sustainability and kind of want to get an understanding of industry trends from particularly from the major corporate perspective. So I'm so thrilled to have Pamela here and to be able to kind of continue our conversations that we often have offline, to be able to bring this information to mobile reCell partners and folks in our network. So Pamela, can you share a little bit more about your company and your role and how Star Signal Partners came to be?
Oh, of course. I started Star Signal back in 2013 as really just a side gig. It was meant to be a platform to help the folks in my professional network find and fill jobs in sustainability. Because really back then, professional credentials were only just emerging, and ESG wasn't a term that was widely used. So it was a kind of a novel task to start writing, job descriptions or screen resumes for folks who had experience in the qualifications to really advocate for business practices that are good for business, good for society, and good for the environment, and not just entirely environmental activism. I got the opportunity to relaunch Star Signal as a full-time pursuit in early 2022. And it allowed me to build out a competitive ESG offering, really focused on the needs of corporations, both public and private. And today, our ESG advisory practice is really focused on board education, decarbonization strategies, and a lot of reporting, reporting aligned with disclosure frameworks like SASB and TCFD, ratings and rankings platforms like CDP and S&P Global's CSA.
Awesome. Quite a bit of acronyms in there. So I might have you break some of those down as we go, just because some folks in our audience, those are going to be very familiar terms, and others it won't be. So I'll just grab a couple of those. SASB, do you want to break that one down? And then maybe TCFD as well.
Yeah, sure. SASB, so Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, developed sector-specific standards for disclosure of financially material topics. And those topics range from environmental to social. They do break them down across about 5 different groups. And those took off like wildfire. They were they really became popular quickly. And it was a very sensible framework. Most of those SASB standards only required maybe 4 or 5 or 6 data points. So companies felt that those were, in line with what they already thought was important to report, but then gave them a standardized framework for those. So that's SASB. TCFD came along a little later. It's the TCFD recommendations. The TCFD is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And it's really an organizational framework for how to manage and improve a material topic, such as climate change. So those two really profoundly changed the disclosure landscape. And there are more acronym related disclosure frameworks coming out, but those two have really remained very popular and very desired by stakeholders and disclosures themselves for a framework for disclosure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for breaking that down for our guests. So in the work you do, what kind of clients do you serve, and what are the services that you offer?
Sure. We serve public corporations, employee-owned corporations, and privately held companies. About 50%, 10%, and 40% break down across our client roster. A couple of those firms are professional services companies, but most are in sectors that manufacture physical product. So they're in food processing, automotive components. They may be suppliers to the aerospace sector, chemicals, materials, and technology hardware. So they are, operating factories and facilities that consume, energy and water and materials. I feel like that's sort of a personal sweet spot of mine. I've been marching around in steel-toed boots in facilities for decades now, and I think that particular group of manufacturing really benefits from ESG programming and disclosure. Another kind of commonality, a lot of my clients exist within the supply chains of companies that are household names, like Walmart, Dell, Ford, Microsoft. There's unique pressures on those companies to then also disclose on behalf of their customers in terms of, Project Gigaton. That's a bespoke Walmart platform for disclosure, for example. So sometimes the reporting burden is even greater on those companies in those particular supply chain. Every one of our clients is unique, and we meet them where they are. Some need more board competency around climate-related risks and opportunities, but some are already transition planning and need our help with climate scenario analysis. Some need to develop just basic infrastructure to track metrics, but others are already setting science-based targets and need our help using a lot of data to then model those targets. Some need help submitting their first CDP disclosure, due this July. Others are working hard to maintain their status on the A list. So it really is a very broad set of needs and a broad kind of maturity level. And then I would say another commonality is, they rely on us to help them honor and amplify the business case for doing all of those things. We work really hard at the beginning of a relationship to understand, what are the drivers for all of these things that you feel like you need to do, and how can we continue to come back to that business case for doing them.
Yeah, that's important stuff. You mentioned education, and I think that you can't get away from educating your clients and those that your clients are working with throughout the process. So I completely understand that part of your job. So speaking of, what is your background and how did it lead you to this role, into this very specialized space that you're in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think my experience is probably pretty similar to to my colleagues. We've all taken a pretty winding path to where we are now. It's great to be a generalist, and it's great to have some really rich experiences in specific areas of sustainability. It's such a broad area. You can do a lot, and you can find your way around and find what you're really passionate about. In my situation, folks of my vintage here, using carbon offset language there, we didn't really have the option of studying sustainability in college. That wasn't really a class you could take. It's so wonderful that that's so accessible now in curriculum. I ended up with a graduate degree in chemistry. I interned with an electric battery group out of Argonne National Lab back in the early 90s when they were initially studying the electric battery. I ended up going on to graduate school, getting a degree in PChem, doing graduate research on stratospheric ozone depletion, also something that you don't hear a whole lot about anymore. I left University of Chicago in the mid-90s and found my fit pretty immediately in environmental consulting, and have been within environmental consulting for a few decades, or tangential to it in most of those years. I did have the opportunity in environmental consulting during the latter half of the 2000s, helping companies and cities around the state of Indiana implement ISO 14001 environmental management systems. So that was an incredibly rich experience. I got to work elbow to elbow with the green teams of numerous manufacturing companies and cities in Indiana. And I really got some insight into the challenges that they were facing. And they taught me in that experience that, some teams may be led by somebody who's more of an activist and just really tries to, advocate only for maybe the environment. Whereas the advocates, their counterparts in other organizations would maybe have better luck getting resources and getting buy-in and making progress. So that was a really important kind of aha moment for me to see kind of the style people took within their organizations to get things done on behalf of the environment, on behalf of their companies. So it was, I've kept that with me kind of philosophically until this point, as I work with teams now. I think, I think I started pivoting from focusing on environmental management systems to truly sustainability. Back in 2010, I took a Bob Pajesik's class at Harvard. Probably several folks watching this know Bob. He's props to Bob. He's truly a sustainability OG and continues to be a tremendous influence on professionals in this field. And it was from him that I really learned about that concept of materiality. In the context of sustainability, there's a financial materiality, one that's really defined by SEC, and then there's this dual materiality that you can't escape it if you are working in sustainability. That seemed to be the missing piece to an ISO 14000 environmental management system. EMS systems were not making change at the pace that was needed in the world. And then when I found that this concept of materiality was really kind of set this urgency around programs and dialing in programs that really mattered to the particular company. It was about 2016 that I finally decided to really dive into all of the frameworks. You've got LEED, GRI, some of the acronyms you mentioned earlier. And I've tried to immerse myself in as many of those and the new ones. And I think that pretty much brings me up to where I am today.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Bob has really been an influencer in the space, and I'm with you on the being in college at a time when those degree programs weren't offered. So your circuitous route to getting to your career path resonates with me, because I similarly had to sort of carve out a path where there wasn't a trail already blazed. And it was challenging at times, but also very rewarding because of that diversity of experience that you kind of have to have. And ultimately that does provide value to you in terms of your perspective in your, where you ultimately end up in your career. So I love hearing about the background of sustainability professionals, because especially those of us in the, the OGs here, because everybody has a different route and we had different aha moments along the way. And so I'm not too surprised to hear that Bob was the cause of one of those aha moments that kind of really helped everything kind of click into place for you. So let's shift to talking about ESG and helping our audience understand ESG. And I'm going to ask you to just kind of start us off with a definition of ESG.
Yeah, I get asked to define ESG and to define sustainability a lot. And I think it helps me to have a mental model of kind of that abstract concept. Because sustainability and ESG are a little bit more abstract, I think, to most people. And so, the visual here kind of shows sort of this progression. Often you see sustainability depicted as the Venn diagram there on the left. I think it unfortunately overemphasizes the tension or even conflict between nature, economy, and society. You have these three overlapping circles. Only that tiny space there in the middle is where you have sustainability happening. Only where those three are in harmony is where, when you get to declare sustainable development. I don't think that evokes a very optimistic or actionable mindset. It's almost even saying only part of the economy has a role in sustainable development, or only part of society has a role in sustainability development, or only part of the environment is required for sustainable development. I don't think that's the case. I think that's unfortunate that we lived with that Venn diagram for so many years. Good news, though, there is sort of an updated version of what sustainability looks like, and it's that nested model there you see in the middle. I think it really captures the key to sustainability, that our economy works best nested within a healthy society, which itself is dependent on a healthy environment. We saw plainly during COVID that when society breaks down, the economy falters. Similarly, when populations are fleeing famine and drought and an otherwise hostile environment, they don't have time to read to their children or go bird watching or whatever you think results in a civil society. Companies like Patagonia, Subaru, they've really tapped that kind of wisdom that we know. They know their businesses will thrive if more of their consumers have access to the profound gifts of nature. How often do you see those images in their advertising and on their, their brands? If their consumers associate that feeling of being in awe in nature with their brand, they're going to be loyal to that brand. So this is just a very simple model of sustainability. It depicts, like I said, that wisdom that we already have about how these three systems wholly depend on each other. All of the trade-offs you make stay inside these circles. You can't kind of farm out those trade-offs as externalities, where maybe that's what that Venn diagram invokes. Taking and kind of leveraging that nested circle model, you can extend that to kind of a mental model for ESG. And the first group that did that was the Financial Stability Board. They are the ones who convened the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We mentioned TCFD earlier in the program. And really this established an organizational framework for managing climate risks, but it can be applied to the management of any material topic that is part of an ESG program. So I'd encourage everybody to spend some time thinking about, how to transition. If they're still using the Venn diagram mental model of sustainability, consider how much better it communicates what, sustainability needs to be by using that nested model.
Yeah, I think something that really resonates with me about these nested models, both of them, the middle one and the one on the right, is that it's kind of a but-for model. Society wouldn't exist but for nature sort of providing resources for society, and an economy would not exist but for society. And I think that same sort of but for relationship exists on your ESG side. You can't set targets and have metrics if you don't have those other layers to and sophistication to your framework and to your structure. So I'm with you. I'm on team ditch the Venn model and go with the nested. So
great, well said.
Let me scroll down here. Okay. So ESG has been in the news a lot lately.
Yes, it has.
At every level. I mean, you can't turn on national news without hearing something related to ESG. And if you're, nerds like us, we're going layers deep, and we read ESG Today, every day. But you don't even have to go that deep, right? It's on the 6 o'clock news. Right. Because there's so much change happening right now. So can you kind of give listeners what an overview of what is the regulatory landscape for ESG right now in the US, and what's coming soon?
Yeah, that I geek out over this question a lot, probably more than I should. There's 2 regulatory regimes setting up. It's fascinating. The first one is a public regulatory regime, maybe the one that we're more accustomed to. So for example, on the first day of the Biden administration, the US rejoined the Paris Agreement. Then, later that August, Biden signed into law the US Inflation Reduction Act. And that some have deemed, the largest action ever taken by Congress and the US government to combat climate change. So you have all of these, state level activities happening. The Biden administration also called for an all agency or whole of government approach to combating climate change. So the SEC, more acronyms at you, FTC and DOJ, the various agencies, government agencies, have focused their enforcement tools on a wide array of environmental issues. The DOJ made a commitment to tackle the climate crisis by prioritizing enforcement actions that will take a look at current and past actions regarding greenhouse gas emissions. You have the FTC cracking down on this phenomenon known as greenwashing, which I'm sure is a very familiar term now. Those are false marketing claims related to the environment. And then the SEC is currently formulating a rule that would require companies to significantly increase their disclosures related to climate risk. But it's not all good news, which is why it's in the news so much now. I recently learned that in June, that the June release of the SEC rule has been delayed till this fall. So we're going to end up waiting a little longer for that one. Actually, the FTC and the DOJ have even grown more resistant to the private sector's collaboration on climate change mitigation efforts, citing antitrust violations. So that's a pretty scary position for companies to be in that are actually trying to collaborate with one another to innovate, away climate change. You have, of course, Congress planning to investigate financial firms that incorporate ESG issues into their investing decisions, and you have state legislators drafting and enacting an array of anti-ESG laws. So that's sort of the perspective from that first regulatory regime, the public regime, the state-led regime. The second one is kind of where I've existed for a while now. It's emerging from the private sector. It's, everyone in ESG reporting knows the influence that BlackRock's annual letter to CEOs has on those businesses that that letter is directed to, businesses being held by BlackRock. But it also has an effect on those companies' peers and the entire sectors in which those companies are situated. And then there's a proliferation of frameworks of ranking and ratings frameworks that companies participate in that judges their ESG performance, and sometimes very publicly. That's not a state-led effort. That's, in many cases, an NGO will lead those. It's sort of a polycentric approach to regulation, where non-state actors are able to transcend either the non-existent or the dysfunctional efforts by the state. The Paris Agreement itself is an example of that type of governance approach, where it's really carved out a role for non-state actors. And I think it contemplated that polycentric regulatory style. The downside of all of that, though, it's probably resulted in sort of a blunting of demand for public regulation. That might be why we see our state-led efforts so lagging behind and so ineffective.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting interplay between the state actors and just the folks that exist to create awareness. Sometimes that's discourse in the public realm that a company may not answer to them directly, but because they've sort of made public some of the actions of these corporate actors, they do answer to them because they do answer to the public. So it's an interesting landscape about who answers to who and who's in charge. And I think companies are in a very interesting position to have to, be beholden to all of those different forces and actors out there, even if they're not legally held responsible to them.
Right. And there's no guarantee that some of the regulatory regime that they've been, experiencing up until now will actually align with the forthcoming, say the SEC guidance. Will the reporting standards be the same, or will it kind of cause a company to duplicate efforts or add, a greater reporting burden on them? I don't think anybody's looking for that, because you'd rather spend their time and resources on actually making the change, not reporting on what you've done. Yeah.
Right. It's something I've noticed as it appears to be a pretty decent trend is when companies aren't sure who to report to, they end up kind of covering all the bases. And the appendix of the sustainability report contains the disclosures for TCFD, SASB, CDP, kind of all of them. And it's a lot of it is the same information, sort of formatted slightly differently, but that way all bases are covered. Can you speak a little bit to that? Is there is that kind of going to stick around, do you think, or is there going to be some simplification?
I think everybody would love some simplification, but companies that have been reporting, a TCFD index or reporting on their sustainability standards and have actually been getting some benefits out of it are going to continue to do that. Each of those, reporting disclosure formats are really targeted to a different audience. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They're, covering their bases. They're trying to make sure each one of their stakeholders with different interests are getting the data they need. And it does benefit that company to do so. If the SEC guidance comes out and it really only contemplates the perspective or the interests of the shareholder, companies may continue to report across multiple disclosure frameworks because they are getting benefits out of that. So I don't think this magical idea of consolidating all sustainability reporting standards, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. We've got an amazing effort underway with more acronyms. I'm not going to burden you with more acronyms. And I think there's a lot of hope that will be a more standardized framework. But from where I sit, kind of, side to side with companies that are benefiting from disclosure, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So we're still going to get all of those appendices on. And also, don't forget, these companies are also responding to customer specific surveys. So they may have an annual report, but they, CDP is a different reporting process, replying to customer centric, sustainability surveys, the Walmart Gigaton reporting efforts. Those are all individual efforts, and I don't see those going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and actually, I kind of see it, although from the outside, it could appear like extra work, extra effort to report on all these different disclosure platforms. I actually see that as, and I want to get your thoughts on the extra work side of that, but the fact that they are still doing all these different platforms because they speak to these different audiences, to me, that's very promising, because it means that they're engaging more stakeholders on the topic of sustainability, and more people are asking that question, more from supply chain side, investor side, and the general public side are wanting answers to these questions. So to me, it's the fact that we're elevating the awareness and the inquiry of sustainability is good across the board. What can you say about the effort, the extra effort that it takes to report across platforms? Is that significant or not really?
It is significant, but I think a lot of companies that have been reporting now for a few years do see real benefits from that engagement, and do seek feedback from their stakeholders on past reporting. And they are looking for ways of improving, their reporting that speaks specifically to a particular stakeholder group. I think the magic happens back when you are doing a materiality assessment. If you thoroughly, engage with all of your stakeholders, you're going to get a nice list of topics that may prevent you from having a blind spot of where a risk might exist, or where your reputation might be, a bit unknown. So yeah, I think that self-awareness of a company to understand the perspectives of it, or to even know who its stakeholders are, is always beneficial. It's always a step. It may be a lot to manage, and typically the sustainability or ESG teams in corporations are still pretty small. So it is, the reporting burden is real, but I think as long as you start your process and you build your team with a real strong sense of the business case, what you expect out of those resources and that disclosure, you're gonna improve, and you're gonna create value. I hate to kind of use that jargon, but absolutely.
Well, so speaking of the sustainability and ESG team at companies, who is typically tasked with gathering the data and providing the reports within a company?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Those teams are usually very cross-functional in nature. You may have folks coming from environmental health and safety, procurement, facilities, operations. So, ideally for ESG reporting specifically, ideally a board will assign oversight responsibility to maybe the audit committee of the board. And then that committee may work with executive leadership to develop sort of a roadmap for ESG reporting, a multi-year roadmap, because a lot of times companies will start, with a couple of manageable reports, get some feedback, and then, re-examine their efforts. But then you'll have, maybe you'll have a chief sustainability officer. I don't see those very often. I think they're starting to be more present. But sometimes you'll have a team, a cross-functional team that maybe has never worked together before on a project like this. So there's a learning curve there. You may have people, head of investor relations, HR, a facility manager, corporate communications, public government affairs. You'll have a really interesting group of folks come together to help produce an ESG report. Which again is another exercise in self-awareness. Sometimes those people bring to the table knowledge that other specialists were not aware of. So that's always a growth opportunity, I think, for companies. Rarely do they bring IT to the table when they're strategizing their ESG program. So that might be a recommendation to start seeding throughout teams, is to try to bring IT in sooner than later. Usually they're called upon to fix problems or get data collated, but in terms of strategy, not as often.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. That's literally my role at Mobile reCell, right? Is to make sure the IT professionals in a company are included in the sustainability conversations, not only for the data gathering, but for the impact they can have, and for taking a proactive approach to thinking about managing the assets, and how to think beyond just deploying the assets. So yeah, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. And it is a challenge that lies ahead. So let's both take that one on, I say.
In the universe of ESG topics, there has been a lot of interest in cybersecurity, information technology, intellectual property protection, customer privacy. Those sorts of topics are not uncommon in a materiality assessment. Companies take those very seriously, and they'll bring tech and IT in for those pieces.
Right.
But it's not as much of a best practice to be hugely transparent about your cyber security processes, because that would be like handing the keys to the vault to your hackers. So even the reporting regime that's expected of folks in IT is a little bit different than the environment and the society pillars.
So zooming back out a little bit more broadly, what kind of companies, what kind of entities need to be, are responsible for, have to answer to ESG, and who does that touch? And maybe it's easier to ask, who does it not touch, depending on the scope of it. Seems like the fingers of ESG are expanding every day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. If you have investors, if you have publicly traded customers, if you have publicly traded peers, if you have robust employee engagement, ESG is probably already on your radar. I can give you an example. The CDP disclosure season kicked off in April, and usually that is followed by a flurry of invitations to disclose, and that's in large part due to they have 300 members of the CDP supply chain issuing disclosure requests to approximately 40,000 members of their supply chain. So that's 40,000 requests going out in April. So if you do business with Walmart, Microsoft, MasterCard, McKinsey, Target, a list 300 long, you have either started your 2023 disclosures, or you're having some pretty hard conversations with your leadership about why you aren't. I think CDP published 2022 an estimate of some $6.4 trillion, trillion with the T, in purchasing power that represents. So that's the business case for being one of the 19,000 or so companies that actually do respond to the CDP request. They do get preferred vendor treatment for demonstrating they're doing their part to help their customers achieve their goals. For instance, Dell is a member of that CDP supply chain program, and they themselves have disclosed, they're walking the walk. They have publicly committed to reducing the intensity of their Scope 3 emissions for purchased goods and services by 60% by 2030. So that Scope 3, Dell's Scope 3 for purchased goods and services is literally the Scope 1 and 2 of their suppliers. So they are trying to measure and monitor and achieve their goals, and they need the data from their vendors on their Scope 1 and 2. So any vendor who provides goods and services to Dell, therefore, is on the hook to reduce their own Scope 1 and 2 emissions, since those are Dell's Scope 3 emissions, and we know Dell has publicly committed to reducing those. In 2021, Dell engaged with over 90% of their suppliers by spend on emission activities. So they have a toolkit. They work with them on target setting, energy efficiency projects, renewable energy tracking. And then they award vendors points on the social and environmental responsibility section of their vendor scorecard when those vendors demonstrate alignment with Dell's target setting and making progress on scope 1 and 2 reduction targets.
Yeah, very quickly, you can see the kind of nature of the bubble that expands and the arms that reach out. And that captures a lot of folks in supply chains just by nature of how, you know, somebody else's scope 3 is somebody else's 1 and 2 and vice versa. So very quickly that sweeps a lot of companies down to the local level, honestly, right? Like,
absolutely, even the smallest shop. Yeah, if they get that request from CDP, it may be a tremendous burden for them to do that reporting, and they may be able to communicate that information to Dell otherwise. But that is a very popular route to communicating directly with Dell. Out of the 40,000 supply chain requests right now, only about half of those requests are answered. So there's still some competitive advantage available to companies to, actually disclose and kind of get a seat at the table.
Yeah. So what challenges do you commonly encounter when you're working with companies on their ESG reporting? What are the main ones that you see commonly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, in kind of general buckets, I can think of 3. And one is managing change. There are new standards, new platforms, new reporting tools, new headlines, new hot topics constantly. And there can be so much uncertainty, especially if you're just starting out, what to report, how to report, who to report it to, that it can nearly paralyze an ESG team. When you have spent as many years as I have in this field, I know kind of where, you can get some quick wins and get some momentum gathered and build on that. Obviously, trying to streamline those reporting efforts as much as possible really helps reduce that reporting burden. But, always, reminding that company as a third party, as their advocate, what the business case is for all of that. And just trying to manage change. 1 year climate change was everything. Next year it's biodiversity. So, do they, shift 90 degrees, 180 degrees in their reporting? Probably not. And having a really, serious conversation about that is important to have to kind of grease the wheels and get their reporting function back off the ground. Maybe the second biggest challenge I see is just managing those requests for disclosure. They're getting these invitations from CDP. Maybe they have an annual report that they themselves, like to control the narrative and put it out there. But disclosure needs to be responsive. They are getting requests directly from their customers. They need to, respond to them in a timely manner. They need to respond to them consistently. We're going to see lawsuits over companies saying one thing to one customer and a different thing to another customer. If you are not consistent, that's definitely a liability. And that's been a reason to not disclose in many cases. And accurate, it means having the data verified, understanding the data, having a complete set of data, that's important too. So disclosure needs to be principled. And there is a tendency for companies to kind of drift off course over a whole annual reporting cycle. So it's important for them to kind of have a North Star and have some principles that underlie their disclosure processes. So that's sometimes a challenge. Another challenge that I see is really getting those disclosures across the finish line, getting those disclosures published. Companies I work with are doing really great things, and they will draft wonderful principled voluntary disclosures. But often, those disclosures don't make it past the audit committee in 100%. There's parts that get taken out or edited. or just diluted. I wouldn't say, they're not being, changed to be false. They're just either getting removed or just made more vague, I guess is a better word. Because there's this fear of getting, nailed for greenwashing. There's a lot of headlines about companies getting nailed for greenwashing. Maybe they don't want to, give up some competitive advantage by some sort of innovation that they have, that they are proud of, that they really want to talk about. A number of reasons could be for why an entire disclosure doesn't get published. And there's a name for this phenomenon. It's called green hushing. If you've not heard that one before, it's where, all the great things happening in the corporate trenches around ESG don't see the light of day. And I think that's a shame, because I think the, annual reporting cycle is sort of an engine that drives progress. And when we're not getting the full value out of those disclosures and like learning, what great things are happening, if my competitor is doing something really great, I want to do something, even better. And if they're not publishing what they're doing that's so great, it kind of, it kind of chills, I think, progress. So those are my top 3 challenges.
Yeah. And those aren't small challenges. So, I think it's really beneficial for companies to have somebody working. Obviously, to have somebody internally is ideal, but then having a perspective of somebody from the outside like yourself who can help, can sort of see some of these coming, give them some tools to prevent those from sort of taking hold, and give them a sense of what their peers are doing, what other similarly sized companies are doing, and how they're managing through those challenges. I think that's a very unique perspective and value that you bring to these companies as a consultant. There's no way that the internal team will have access to that kind of insider information around just, the trends, what's happening out there, what challenges other companies are seeing. And also, as you mentioned it before, the difference between being an activist and an advocate. And you're in a position to be able to be the advocate for your customers because of that perspective that you bring. So I think customers would be, would benefit a lot from the ability and the opportunity to work with you, with your experience and your perspective. Let's shift and talk a little bit about the intersection between ESG and the tech sector and tech companies. Have tech companies responded to, interacted with ESG data and reporting? Where do you see that overlap, and where do you see ESG kind of landing with tech companies?
Yeah, and I think tech companies are more on the sophisticated end of the ESG spectrum. They've spent years and they have tremendous experience knowing how to create, record, manage all kinds of data. And they also have a great appreciation for the hazards of data quicksand, too much data, a lot of the wrong data. So they seem to have some innate abilities to really, resolve that and have the right kind of data. And to the extent that some of those companies are spinning off products or entire business units to help other companies create, record, and manage their data. There are a lot of products out there on the market right now that are specifically to help companies manage environmental data and ESG data. Some of those products are not easily adapted to companies in different sectors. They're great for other tech companies, who probably already have their own, because ESG is nuanced. It's very dependent on companies kind of what products they create and where their material issues are. So not all data tools and platforms fit everybody. You have to call the folks in IT to help get those platforms to function when they need to be adapted for a different sector. And then that's sort of from the data side. From the ESG side, from a material topic standpoint, I think tech companies are really aware that the energy efficiency of their product is one of their top material issues. It's a key attribute that their customers and their consumers know about and think about. I think one of their biggest challenges is end of life, and which they need to be able to reclaim and recycle materials or reuse materials from their products. And there's only a nascent circularity model in place for that. I know that's top of your mind in your role.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said before, the focus is a lot on the deployment and not on the sort of recapturing of those assets. So lots of opportunity in that space. Of course, mobile reCell is working in that space to make that process simple for our customers. Is there an example of a tech company that you think is just really nailing it when it comes to gathering the data, sharing the data, and leveraging ESG as kind of part of their corporate identity?
Let me answer that maybe in two different ways. Looking back at the ESG data management products that are out there, the tools to create, gather, manage data. I'm pretty agnostic about those. I'm comfortable with an Excel spreadsheet and maybe even a Power BI dashboard any day. Maybe if those products aren't really on target. But as far as tech companies mastering their own data needs and then sharing it with their upstream and downstream partners, recently I've done a benchmarking involving Dell and Zebra, and they both impressed me with their ability to do that. Dell has an entire toolkit available to their vendors to help them manage data and use that toward ESG goals.
Yeah, I think that's really a key thing for the entities that are setting these goals and needing their supply chain to come along with them in the journey, is that providing of tools in order to make it to lessen the burden, shorten that learning curve for them so that they can find success in that space and make the business case internally and within their own organizations. It's increasingly important, but the resources need to be there as well. So I commend companies like Dell, and even, Walmart was one of the early adopters of supply chain trickle down pressure when it comes to reporting and sharing information. So
absolutely. And they're so cost conscious that they don't want the costs of additional reporting burdens to be then transferred to Dell, from their vendors back up to Dell. So they're trying to make that reporting burden as little as possible by providing tools and guidance that, that is standardized across their entire supply chain. So they're thinking about the cost of that service too.
Yeah. When it comes to working with large companies, that the types that you work with that are, I know they're in a variety of industries, how often do you get the chance to work with the internal IT team? And what does that look like? How are they engaged in conversations on ESG in the reporting I'm guessing they're going to have some overlap in terms of helping other areas of the business gather and collate the data, but for within the IT department specifically, how are they doing when it comes to gathering data and reporting on their own kind of internal IT operations?
Yeah, I think they're pretty underutilized. I think they are responsive when they are engaged, but I'm not sure that they are always at the table when strategy is being created, which is probably an oversight. I think they've got a lot to contribute to that strategic planning for ESG reporting, especially. I think that again, they're focused on cybersecurity, IP protection, customer privacy, and there's a little different kind of expectation for disclosure around those things. You're not going to want to be as transparent about what you're implementing for that. I think IT, a lot of companies are concerned or aware of the environmental footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions from data centers. So, that may be an area where the IT folks can have some influence over. And then here's another exciting idea. They may be the group that's best equipped for stewarding a company's use of AI. We've really yet to see how ESG and AI will play together at scale. But I'm certain that we're going to see that for better or for worse.
Yeah, just another part of the evolving landscape in ESG is when you add in the AI as another factor, continuing to get very interesting. But yeah, that'll be one to watch for sure. So just broadly thinking about the corporate entities you're working with, who's doing great from your perspective? What industries are doing great when it comes to ESG data gathering and reporting?
Who's doing great? Sometimes it's not a sector that's doing great. Sometimes it's leadership within a company that, has really inspired the team to be diligent and have some discipline around that data collection and management. I think, some of the companies that were some of the first to really embrace ESG or have to embrace ESG have, just from their years and decades of experience, have built processes to gather and manage ESG data. I would say there's a little less differentiation out there now, because we've all now been doing this for a number of years and have refined some processes. So I don't see a whole lot of differentiation among sectors in terms of leading sectors. I would say that my experience with the food processing industry leads me to say that environmental and social data from their agriculture suppliers is lagging. And that's a big deal, because that's where their biggest impact is. It's from their supply chain. So it would be it would be nice to see ag data, ESG data, be more consistent and available to food processing companies. I think that's my insight there.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I love the perspective that you bring to this topic because of your experience working in all those different industries at different scales. I know 2 days are the same, I'm sure, for you in terms of the different topics that you get to talk about and discuss. So that's got to keep it interesting for sure. So in closing, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience, or anything coming down the pike that gets you excited about where the ESG landscape is headed?
Maybe just a couple words to share my optimism with folks that are maybe already involved in ESG reporting, maybe, feel like it's something that they're going to need to start doing soon. There are tremendous opportunities to create value into, managing risks, into attracting and retaining talent. There's a great upside to ESG reporting. I couldn't be in this industry if it were all doom and gloom. And sometimes if you watch the news or read the headlines, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. Going back to that concept of green hushing, I get to see the great things that are happening in the corporate trenches and really fantastic projects and people and innovations, happening every day. That gives me real reason to hope. There's some really brilliant minds out there working really hard on these topics that matter to everyone. Again, you can't just carve off, certain areas of society or environment to really be sustainable. We're all in it together, and there's some incredible work being done. And I welcome you to the ESG journey. There's a lot to learn and a lot to see, but a lot of joy. Well,
that's fantastic to hear. There's so much opportunity, and I'm thrilled that you get to see it and that you can share that perspective with our audience. And I want to thank you again, Pamela, for joining our inaugural Circularity Connections episode today. It was such a pleasure to reconnect with you in the preparation for this, and to be able to share you with my network out there in the world of mobile reCell. And just a couple of things before we close out. First, I just want to encourage people to reach out to Pamela directly. And if they want to schedule a time to chat with her, you can schedule a time directly on her website, which is starsignalpartners.com. And I'll plug again that you connect with her on LinkedIn, because she's she's there a lot and she's got great stuff to share, and is a great perspective to have in your network. Mobile reCell supports your circular economy initiatives with an improved and simplified process of dealing with used IT equipment like laptops, smartphones, and tablets. So please do reach out to us. Our software automates the recovery and disposition process for your corporate-owned IT assets. We deliver meaningful sustainability reports that you can directly input right into your sustainability disclosures that show how your IT asset lifecycle program is creating a sustainable solution and ensuring that these devices remain in the circular economy by reselling, reusing, and when necessary, recycling those assets. So we're really proud of the circularity aspect of our business model and want to be helpful to our customers and making sure that they understand those benefits and leverage the environmental benefits of our product. For more information on mobile reCell and future circularity connections content, please visit mobilerecell.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and have an awesome afternoon.